The disaster recovery drill is scheduled for a Saturday morning. Low traffic, engineering team available, no customer impact if something goes sideways. The plan is straightforward. Simulate a regional failure in the primary AWS region, stand up a full replica of the production environment in the failover region, verify traffic routes correctly, and document recovery time. The team has done this before, 2 years ago, on a smaller stack. The runbook exists. The Terraform code is ready. The team runs the script. 40 minutes later, half the instances haven't come up. The error isn't a misconfiguration. It isn't a network issue. It isn't a permissions problem. It's this: insufficient instance capacity. We currently do not have sufficient capacity in the availability zone you requested. AWS doesn't have the hardware, not in that availability zone, not for that instance type, not at that moment. The drill that was supposed to validate the recovery plan has instead discovered that the recovery plan has a fatal assumption built into it, the assumption that when you need the cloud will have room for you. This assumption is so deeply embedded in how most engineers think about cloud infrastructure that it rarely gets examined. And the reason it rarely gets examined is that it's almost always correct. Most of the time, when you ask AWS for an EC2 instance, you get one. The scale of AWS infrastructure is genuinely staggering. Millions of physical servers across dozens of regions, thousands of availability zones. For everyday provisioning of ordinary instance types, the probability of hitting a capacity wall is low enough that most engineers go years without encountering it. The cloud feels infinite because for most requests, it functionally is. But the cloud is not infinite. It is a collection of physical data centers, physical server racks, physical CPUs and GPUs, hardware that takes months to procure, ship, and install. And the capacity available to you at any given moment in any given availability zone depends on factors you have no visibility into. How many other AWS customers are running workloads in that zone right now? Which instance types are most in demand? Whether a major service just scaled up and absorbed a large chunk of available hardware, and whether AWS has already sold more of that capacity to customers with reservations. There are 3 distinct ways capacity constraints surface, and they behave differently enough that they're worth treating as separate failure modes. The first is the one the disaster recovery team hit: on-demand capacity exhaustion. You make a perfectly valid API call to launch an EC2 instance, your account has the quota to support it, your IAM permissions are correct, your subnet exists, and AWS still refuses because it doesn't have the physical hardware. The insufficient instance capacity error is AWS telling you that the server racks in that availability zone that run the instance type you asked for are currently full. It is not a transient error that retrying will fix in seconds. Capacity doesn't free up on a predictable schedule. It frees up when other customers stop using it, which could be minutes or hours away, or when AWS installs new hardware, which could be days or weeks away. This failure mode surfaces most dangerously at the moment you need capacity most, when you're scaling up under traffic, when you're running a disaster recovery failover, or when you're deploying a major new service. These are the moments when your demand for capacity spikes, and they are exactly the moments when the rest of the AWS ecosystem is also experiencing elevated demand, because your traffic spike correlates with everyone else's, because disaster recovery events tend to be correlated with infrastructure failures that affect multiple customers. The cloud feels most infinite during ordinary Tuesday afternoons. It feels most finite during the moments that matter. The second failure mode is spot instance interruption, and it's structurally different from on-demand exhaustion because it's not a failure at all, it's a designed behavior. Spot instances are AWS's mechanism for selling excess capacity at a discount, up to 90% cheaper than on-demand rates. The trade-off is explicit in the product design. That capacity doesn't belong to you. When AWS needs it back, because on-demand burn has increased, because a reserved customer needs the hardware, because capacity in that pool has tightened, AWS reclaims it. You get a 2-minute warning, then the instance is gone. 2 minutes sounds short because it is short. It's enough time for a graceful shutdown if your application was designed to handle it. It's nowhere near enough time to save in-progress state that wasn't being checkpointed, to complete a long-running transaction, or to do anything meaningful if you weren't already prepared. Teams that run stateful workloads on Spot instances, because Spot is cheap, discover the constraint the hard way. every replica of their service goes down at once because all the replicas were provisioned in the same spot capacity pool, and the whole pool got reclaimed together. The insight that changes how you use Spot is this: Spot interruption is not a random failure, it's a designed reclamation mechanism. AWS isn't terminating your instances because something went wrong. AWS is terminating your instances because the capacity you were borrowing is needed by someone who paid for it more definitively. Treating spot interruption as a possible failure and architecting accordingly. Stateless workloads, multi-zone diversification, graceful shutdown handlers, automatic replacement is not defensive over-engineering. It's understanding what spot actually is. The third failure mode is the subtlest, and in some ways the most important, the gap between what a capacity reservation reserves and what you might think it reserves. AWS offers on-demand capacity reservations, a product that lets you pay to hold capacity in a specific availability zone for a specific instance type, so that when you need it, it's there. This is the correct response to the disaster recovery problem from the opening of this video. But capacity reservations have constraints that teams often discover too late. A capacity reservation reserves capacity for a specific instance type in a specific availability zone. It does not reserve capacity across all availability zones, which means a multi-region failover requires reservations in the failover region, not just the primary. It does not reserve the ability to create a reservation. If capacity in that availability zone is already exhausted when you try to purchase the reservation, you can't create it. The reservation has to exist before you need it, which means you need to know in advance which instance types and availability zones are critical to your recovery plan, and you need to pay for reserved capacity that sits idle until you need it. Teams that plan to create capacity reservations at the moment of a disaster have already lost the race. By definition, a capacity shortage during a disaster is the moment when the most customers are trying to create reservations simultaneously. This brings us to the reframe. The mental model that produces all three of these failures is the same, treating provisioning as a request that the cloud fulfills on demand from an unlimited pool. The correct mental model is that capacity is a finite shared resource, and your access to it at the moment you need it is determined entirely by decisions you made in advance. Capacity you haven't reserved is capacity you don't control. Infrastructure that hasn't been tested in a target region is infrastructure that might not be provisionable in that region. The practical implications fall into three categories. First, design, for instance, type, flexibility. An architecture that requires a specific instance type, say M5.2x large, and nothing else, will hit capacity constraints more often than one that can run equivalently on any of 5 or 6 similar types. EC2 fleet and auto-scaling groups with mixed instance types let AWS select from a pool of options, dramatically increasing the probability that at least one of them has available capacity in the target zone. Rigidly specifying a single instance type is a single point of failure against capacity constraints. Second, test your disaster recovery plan in the target region regularly, not during the actual disaster. The team in the opening scenario discovered their capacity problem during a drill. That's the correct time to find it. Teams that discover it during an actual failover, under real traffic, under real pressure, with real customer impact, are in a qualitatively different situation. Running a scaled-down version of your failover workload in the failover region on a quarterly schedule doesn't just validate the runbook, it validates that the capacity is actually available, which no amount of reading documentation will tell you. Third, understand what you're buying when you buy capacity reservations, and buy them before you need them. For critical recovery paths, the instances that your disaster recovery depends on being provisionable, a capacity reservation is not optional safety overhead. It's the only mechanism that actually guarantees the capacity is there when you invoke the runbook. Running a recovery drill without first confirming whether reserved capacity exists for the critical instance types in the failover region is testing a plan with a known gap in it. The engineers who build the most resilient systems are not the ones who believe the cloud is reliable. They're the ones who understand that the cloud is a shared physical resource, and they've designed their systems around the implications of that fact, including the implication that on the day they need the cloud most, so does everyone else.